Good evening. Welcome to the QCIS channel. Well, on this channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Leon Jones, and tonight I want to talk about CIP. CIP stands for Capital Improvement Projects. Now, when we talk about capital, we're talking about money, how much we're investing into something. Example, a business. So when we say capital improvement projects, where do you normally hear that term? If you guess right, you hear it government, particularly when we deal with cities that have a public works department. And what we do with capital, we allocate the resources to police, fire services, your infrastructure. And I'm going to show you tonight a real project where you can see funds that are allocated. Now, within projects, you're going to deal with life cycle, you're going to deal with contracts. Now, with those contracts, what type of contract? Is it going to be unit cost or is it going to be lump sum? But funds are important when you are dealing with projects. And those projects are construction and or maintenance projects. Now, if you work in a city or a town or a country that has a public works department, not all of that money is going to go into constructing roads. It's going to go into who you're going to hire to be your designers. And when it comes to weather, you're going to have to use some of that money for snow removal if you live in the areas where you have bad weather. You're also going to have to utilize the funds for putting up signs and guardrail. Why? Because you have vehicles that run into your signs and guardrail, and also lighting systems, putting down pavement markings, seal. If you look at asphalt, asphalt, when it starts to get bad, you see the wheel running, and you see the alligator cracking. Now, before it can be reconstructed or milled and filled, you're going to see maintenance or operations come out and utilize, looks like it's a Georgia buggy, and you see a big cube of tar. Well, what they do with that tar is they put that tar inside of a Georgia buggy. A Georgia buggy heats up to about 800 degrees and it melts that block of tar. And then you see one of the workers out there with a wand. And what he's doing, he's basically sealing all of the joints. Now, the seal is basically used to maintain the road surface. There can also be a maintenance called oil and chip, microsurfacing. Well, regardless, a lot of your capital improvement projects are government projects. Now, for all that to work, you have to look at what kind of budget you have. So basically, you'll hear the term FY. What's going to happen in the next FY? Now, FY stands for fiscal year, not calendar year, but fiscal year. Because when we deal with fiscal year, we deal with money. Now, a fiscal year generally goes from July 1st of the current year to June 30th of the next year. Now, here in Indiana, we're in fiscal year 2025. Now, when I worked for PennDOT, it was a little different. Their fiscal year was a year behind. Now they're in fiscal year 2024. Now that's on the state level. Now, when we get to the federal level, fiscal year goes from October 1st of the current year to September 30th of the next year. So right now, if we are working on any federal project, we're in fiscal year 2024. Now, it's very important because we utilize fiscal for the books. We have to keep track of our monies. Now, capital is, again, where we have a large pot of money. And we have to decide what we want to do with that pot of money. Now, when it comes to government, when you're given a large pot of money, you have to spend it. Because if you don't spend it, it will be taken away and allocated somewhere else. Let me give you an example. If the FHWA, which is the Federal Highway Administration, lends Indiana $560 million for infrastructure projects. Well, if the state of Indiana does not spend that money, or if they spend half of that money, what happens? Any money's left over, go right back to the Federal Highway Administration. And what they're going to do with that money is send it to another state that will use the money for their projects. Now, remember, when it comes to roads and bridges or other infrastructure, a number of individuals think it comes from actual taxpayers. Well, indirectly, we pay a tax when we go fill up our vehicles. That's known as a gas tax. And some states have a higher gas tax than others. I know Pennsylvania has a 28-cent gas tax, which is really high. Now, other ways that states make money is through toll roads. Now, you have states like Michigan, and Wyoming, and Montana, and Washington, and I believe Oregon. You have a number of states that don't have toll roads. I know Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, Carolinas. I know Virginia did have a toll road known as the Richmond-Petersburg Turnpike, but they got rid of those tolls a long time ago. They also had the Virginia Beach Norfolk Expressway, which at that time went from I-64 all the way to Virginia Beach. It was known as State Route 44. Well, Virginia decided that they were going to renumber their road systems. Well, they didn't renumber every road system, but they took I-264, which starts from I-64 just west of Portsmouth, and extended it all the way out to Virginia Beach. Well, I-264 used to go from 64 loops around in Virginia, because if you go east on 64 and you curve around past Chesapeake, well, you notice there are no directional signs. Why? Because when you're going east, you're technically going west. That was confusing. And at one time, they were going to use their capital funds to change I-64. They were going to make it I-864. And then they were going to eliminate 664. Well, that would have been confusing because individuals would have to exit off the main road and head south. 664 is a 3-digit number. It's just like 464. And I'm giving you all this because monies are used for signage as well. That's part of the infrastructure. And there's monies that are allotted to fix all of the signs. And this is where you get all of your contracts. Now, let me get into the PowerPoint and show you what a capital improvement program is. Now, again, we are dealing with capital projects from a fiscal 2023 budget. Now, when we deal with a capital improvement program, what it is, it's a tool used to improve coordination and the timing of major projects, plan for capital replacement and major maintenance costs, and reduce fluctuations in the tax rate. Now, of course, made a mistake up here. It says goals for fiscal year 16. It should be goals for fiscal year 23. Now, what the goals? Well, with the capital improvement program, you want to address immediate needs and fund budget shortfall. Want to expand collaboration with all general fund departments. Of course, want to address deferred maintenance on city assets. Now, fiscal year 16 capital projects budget at a glance. Now, what you have up here, M stands for million. So you have a 20 million plus budget. Then you have 10 asset classes with general funds. You're dealing with accounting. Then you have seven funding sources. You also have 5 restricted funding sources, which impact fees, street capital tax, penny for parks, grants, and TIF. And then in red, you have 2 unrestricted funding sources, CIP bond, general fund operating. Okay. When I talk about different areas where monies are allocated, well, capital projects are allocated by asset class. So we're going to say we're dealing with a city right now. Now, what do you have in cities? Well, you have a fleet. Now, what is a fleet? Fleet is all of the city vehicles used for city employees to go out to construction sites. They can use the vehicles for parks. It can also be your police cars, your fire engines, your ambulance. It's all of your buses, your trains. It's everything that's vehicular, used for traveling on roads. Then we get into facilities, your buildings. Those are your facilities, your park buildings, your basically all of your government buildings. Those are the facilities. Your library, your police department, your recreation and parks, and that includes your bike path rehabilitations. Then you have your road and sidewalk maintenance, road and sidewalk enhancements, DPW capital projects, administration and advance. Or it's actually administration and expansion. Now, advance is when we basically, when we advance something, we basically bring a project, we let a project before its actual let date. This is what we called it in Pennsylvania. When I'm talking about, let's say a project was supposed to let May 10th of 2018. Well, something happened. We got the funding or more funding. So we decided to advance it from May to April. That's what advancing is. In other words, we started our project early. Expansion. What do we mean by expansion? It could be of government services. It could be infrastructure. That word is very vague. It could be expansion of, like I said, services. Okay. All right, here we go. We bring me up here. All right, now you have what we call your general fund. This is when we get into accounting. Now, remember what I told you about the categories. These are your asset categories. Now, with your fleet, under your fleet, we have recycling, streets, parks, fire, police, and library. That's a general fund for fleet. So when we deal with capital, we deal with funding, as I stated. Then we have facilities, your city hall, your library, your fire stations, your police stations, your arenas, the Miller Center, your firehouse gallery, Pine Street, 645 Pine Street. Then your cemetery. Then when we get into roads and sidewalks maintenance, well, that's a street capital budget. Then you have a street phase, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, could be additional sidewalks, additional streets, additional curbs, park road widening, bridge repairs, preventative maintenance streets. Now, if you really close your eyes, we're really talking about public works as well, because we get into enhancements, roadway and sidewalk enhancements, be a parkway. It could be a drive, Manhattan Drive slope failure. Now, what does FWHA stand for? It should be Federal Highway Administration. Well, we have Manhattan Drive too. And I believe this information all comes from a actual city in Vermont. We have waterfront access, pedestrian scoping for bikes, wayfinding, lakeside pine signalization. Again, these are all under your funds, and your funds could start with 0 all the way to 9. There's a number, and that fund number is generally like an item number on a contract. It identifies what your fund is. Look at parks, penny for park projects, impact-free projects, bike path rehabilitation, North Beach overpass design, City Hall Park foundation or fountain repair, City Hall Park fountain repair, then projects from grants and donations. And then what about your administration? Very important. IT projects, new projects, contingency, copier leases. Then you have here's where I'll work right in here, your new operational expenses. Comes from your engineering and project management. And of course, under project management, you can say construction. Under engineering, you could say design. Expansion needs, okay? When we talk about expansion needs, it's always going to be, could be extra funds. Extra funds needed for what? New sidewalks, new City Hall Park, parks improvements, land purchases, BCA reinvestment, fire department growth, police department growth, facilities growth. And when you are a mayor of a city, this is what you go by. This is where you start dealing with budgets. That's why I tell you, when it comes to politics, there's some people who don't understand what it is to be an executive, and your mayor is the chief executive officer of that city. your governor is the chief executive officer of the state, and the president is the chief executive officer of the country. Of course, the mayor, the governor, the president, and even your county exec, they also have different hats because they actually oversee everything. But budgeting is very important. But you have to understand budgeting because there are going to be areas where you're going to have to cut costs. All right. Now, what we're looking at right here, capital projects. Again, I made a mistake. I have fiscal year 16. It should be fiscal year 23. Now, what we're doing here, we're trying to find out what our budget is. Do we get a budget overrun or do we get a budget shortfall? So, in order to find out where we are with our budget, we have revenues and expenditures. Now, you must understand this. It looks like a P&L statement. If you have a business, you would set all this up. Now, for the revenues, what's going to give you some revenue? Well, fees, department operating budgets, bonds, penny for parks, street capital tax. Now, you notice a lot of your revenues for the government come from taxes and donations. So, getting all that, you have your total revenues. Now, expenditures, and this is what can kill a budget. Well, expansion needs, administration, parks and recreation, new operational, anything that says expenses or anything that needs to be built, you have to take it out of the city budget. That is an expense. Fleet, debt service. Well, if you look at it, you have your total revenues at $18,638,662. And then your expenditures, you have $20,965,863. Well, now, looking at everything, when I add those numbers up or subtract those numbers, I'm going to get a negative. And when I have a negative, I'm going to get a negative $2,327,201. That's a budget shortfall. That means you're in the red. You're over budget somewhere. So what happens during this fiscal year, you're going to look at that number. And that means during the next fiscal year, and this is how you have to think, you're going to be looking at, okay, how do I get back out of the red? Well, you're going to look at your expenditures and you're going to find out why you had so many expenditures. And you're going to do some cutting from your expenditures to try to get back into the red. Now, what happens if I had 18,638,662 for expenditures? Then I break even. And this is what you do with business. Government is a business as well. But government, since they're not in business for profit, they're in business to deliver services. If you break even in government, in my humble opinion, that's good. If you have a shortfall, that means you spent too much money. And if you are in positions of power and you're going to get elected, not understanding budgets can have you removed from office. You have to remember, politics plays in a big part of capital budgets because it's about where funding goes. All right. Again, we have the capital budgets shortfall. So You see all these numbers in red where you have your road and sidewalks maintenance, then you have Cliff Street Phase 3, additional sidewalks and curves. Well, $738,000. That means you're in the red. So somewhere on the line, they might not have as many of those projects next year because you want to get out of the red. Just like sidewalk enhancement, 75,000, all projects in capital budget. Well, here's what I'm going to tell you so we can interpret this data very carefully. You might hear politics say this, well, let's look at tax cuts. All right, let's say you had taxes of 180,000 this year, and you wanted to give some of your money back, some of the money back to the people. Let's say 50,000. Well, you're going to hear particularly the Democratic politicians say, well, we can't afford that. Well, no, you really could. What happens is you still have monies left. You're still collecting taxes, but you're not collecting as much as you had last year. Well, same with budgets. Your budget for the next fiscal year might be smaller than the budget that you had in your previous fiscal year. Why? Because you're trying to keep from going in debt. If you constantly go in debt every year, you're going to bankrupt your city and you may lose your tax base. You must remember that your citizens are your tax base. And your citizens are not only residential, they also have businesses. Tax revenue is very important to collect for governments because what do governments have to also pay? Something that wasn't mentioned, and it is in the budget, employees. Also, they may pay consultants, contractors. So you have money coming for another general fund. And this is why governments, they look at how many individuals they need. Now, sometimes if they can't fill a spot, they might get rid of that spot. It's all about budgeting. And a good executive knows how to budget money. They know how to keep afloat. Tourism brings in money. You have to find out what brings the most taxes. All right, funding scenarios. All right, fiscal year 15 from BED, 750,000. Well, if you look at the budgets, you have 750,000 and 250,000. Total capital was 1 million. Now that's you have to do $1 million worth of projects to eliminate shortfall. Now I'll get more of how to do the math later on. And if you have taken a course in engineering economics, you will get into budgets, projects, how much you're going to pay for a project, what is O&M. Everything is affected when we deal with funding scenarios. Because right here, this right here, what is this number right here? That number, that $2,327,201, that's your shortfall. That means you had more expenditures than revenue. Now, in order to eliminate that shortfall, you need $1 million worth of projects to eliminate that. And then they go back and calculate the numbers again to see if the shortfall is eliminated. Okay, then you have capital budgets with proposed funding. Again, now you're dealing with revenues. Now you have proposed revenues. So remember I told you about how to get out of debt, where this $1 million falls? Well, here's where it falls, right here. You have all of your revenues up there. These were your initial revenues. I'm going to say from your previous years. Well, you have your proposed revenues. All right. This is where that $1 million comes from, so you can eliminate that shortfall. So when you go ahead and add 1 million to it, then you look at this is your total potential revenues right here. This is your total revenues. Now, here's something else that you have to do too. Now you're going to think about that. Well, if I eliminate $1 million, or if I have $1 million in potential revenues, and I added to my total revenues of 18,638,662, well, that only gives me 19,638,662. Then, if my expenditures are the same at $20,965,863, guess what? I still have a budget shortfall. All right, that is true. Now, under that budget shortfall, what you're going to do is you're going to look at funding, and you're going to look at, well, what projects do you need and what projects don't you need? So what's going to happen is to bring all of your expenditures to basically eliminate your shortfall, you're going to make some cuts. And the cuts are going to be your budget shortfall, which that's going to be negative. Your negative is always your budget shortfall. And then your expenditure cuts are going to be positive. So basically, to eliminate all of your shortfall, you're basically going to add positive and negative. They're going to cancel everything out. You're going to get zero, and it's going to eliminate the shortfall. And that's what you have to do when you're dealing with numbers. Accounting. Now, deal with capital works projects. The Department of Public Works advances transportation-related capital projects within a citywide capital plan. Now, again, there are 5 categories of transportation-related capital projects: street capital paving program, sidewalk capital improvement projects, planning studies, standalone major transportation projects, disaster recovery projects. They total 9.7 million. How did I get that? All the numbers are right here. They're generated. That's the background. So then when we have the street capital program, that is basically the city's annual program to invest in the right of way, the public right of way infrastructure investments. And that includes repaving of roadways, assist with the redevelopment of parks, roadway infrastructure, the development or redevelopment of sidewalks, and providing of local match funds to leverage state and federal transportation dollars, curb replacement. Now, I work for Indianapolis DPW. Now, I don't figure anything like this out, but we have a department, that's the revenue department. They're the ones who actually look at all these numbers and they figure it out. They're very, very important because the numbers are going to tell you what projects we're going to get and what projects we're not going to get. Again, you have sidewalk capital improvement projects, planning studies. And you have to look at, okay, the projects. All right, this project will benefit students and parents of Chaplin Elementary as well as improve pedestrian access and safety to Callahan Park. You have to explain what you're going to, or why you need these projects. Now, a lot of times you're going to go in front of a commission or board, city council. This is what you do in a city. And you may even have some individuals who are not city employees, but they could be like your national conservation district, because you have to look at environmental studies, have to look at outside consulting firms. It's a lot that goes into these projects and which projects are important. Standalone projects, disaster recovery projects, projects in development. Now, if you want to know what a TIF is, a TIF is tax incremental funding. And usually that's something that the city is going to utilize in the near future to advance the redevelopment of a particular street. And then you're going to have your projects in development. It could be your rail, it could be your slope failure, your lakeside resignalization. That's how your monies are working. Then we deal with FAIR, your sidewalk improvement or capital improvement program, which is a method of sidewalk prioritization that is fair. It takes in account the level of importance of the population that the sidewalk segments serve, be seniors and school-aged children, the number of people it serves, the existing physical condition of the facility, and to consider the installation of sidewalk facilities that are missing and do not allow the same degree of connectivity. And then we look at factual. Well, on the factual, it's a continuous improvement process to improve fact-based decision making. So we deal with sidewalk inventory and prioritization. We also utilize a continued effort to inspect paved roadway segments. And we have exemplary project management, time, cost, and quality. So if somebody asks you what's involved with project management, time, cost, and quality. As we define time as a convenient effort to advance projects to meet the priorities defined by the city's elected officials and the public. Then the cost, competitive procurement process, maintain and improve project accounting. And quality, my favorites, because this is what can keep your costs down. When we deal with quality, we deal with skilled inspection and design professionals involved in all stages of a project to ensure project delivery meets industry standards and provides the highest degree satisfaction. And people like me come in, we go inspect it for compliance because we're going to have certain contractors who are going to bid this work. We want to make sure that the contractors understand the design and they understand the specifications. Now, on the inspection side, we do not tell the contractor how to build the project. You should already know how to build the project, but we will tell them that they need to meet. Now, when I say specifications for quality, you can do a little bit more, but you only need to meet the minimum specifications. So if somebody tells you, oh, well, you got to meet above the specifications, that's false. Specifications give you only the minimum. And then forward, areas of emphasis. And this is the completion of a project, the advancing of a project, schedule, because you can advance schedules, TIF projects. What are you going to do? Budgeted to hire a limited service project works engineer. Tells you when construction is going to begin on certain projects. Completion of grant projects. Wayfinding currently underway. Just gives you a schedule. And then here are the budgets right here. It's all of the budgets. Now, you have all of your expenses and all of your revenues. And this is your fiscal year 16. Now, basically, these are your total revenues. These are your expenses. That's your projected budget. This is your fiscal year right now, your expenses. So remember, there's a project budget, there's actual expenses, and you have your revenues. That's basically how capital improvement projects work. You have a bunch of general funds, and then it's about allocating the resources. And basically, the government uses capital improvement. They use the revenues and the expenses. Project accounting. It's very essential that mayors, governors, county execs, even the president, because remember, these are public projects. Taxpayers fund the projects. Whether they're paying for a road project with the gas tax or not, they're still paying a tax. And that's what some governors, well, some governments don't understand. This is why you have some cities in poor conditions. Why? Because they spent money over budget. You look at the city of Dalton, had like $2 million in the black. That are around $13 million or $10 million in the red. Now, when you get that much in the red, it's got to be investigated. And it is currently being investigated because when you are in charge of something, remember, the executive oversees everything. So if I'm an executive, I'm going to go down and find out what's going on in my accounting department. Because remember, accounting, you get audited as well. That's why you have to be a CPA, a certified public accountant, just like being a PE. Person with the license has got more liability than a person without the license. Bottom line, when it comes to capital improvement projects, basically going to include a municipality. Why? Because a lot of your municipalities have infrastructure that's always going to need to be fixed, expanded, or built. And that's it for this overview of capital improvement projects. If you like what I just presented, just comment, share, and subscribe. And if you're looking for some political content right now, you check my main channel out, the 401 Talk Zone radio show channel. Now, once I complete my pre-recording of each video that I do for both channels, 401 Talk Zone radio show and the QCIS channel, I upload both of those channels to my YouTube, or both my YouTube channels up to my Twitter page. Now, for the 401 Talk Zone Radio Show channel, not only do the videos go up to Twitter, I'm also posting videos on True Social and on Rumble. Now, for the QCIS channel, since it is an educational channel, I post the video up on my LinkedIn page. In the end, I just want to thank you all for viewing this content, capital improvement projects from the QCIS channel. Well, on this channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Until next time, my name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful and gracious